Modern humans, hear me speak. In this video, we pick up the tale of oratory from the infamous Pankhurst Trail. We will bring you up to speed on her happenings from the 1908 speech, Plight of Women, to her historical freedom or death in 1913. This is Speaking Through the Ages, where we bring back the dead in an attempt to bring out the values, beliefs, and internal struggles of those humans that came before. We give context to and deliver historical speeches that motivated people to kill, riot, make salt, and sign papers. Previously, we covered Emmeline's bio and delivered her speech, The Plight of Women, which she delivered right after she was released from jail in March 1908. That year, she was arrested 3 times, and in 1912, she was arrested 12 more times. Emmeline and the Suffragettes starved themselves in prison, which led to violent force feeding, but also freedom. Once the girls became too weak, they would be released to recover and were subsequently arrested once again. The Cat and Mouse Act was a law that allowed for the release and rearrest of those women who starved themselves. The Cat and Mouse Act, it's a weird name for the law, but I believe it's because when a cat catches a mouse, they will release it and then recapture it. So in this case, the state is the cat and the women are the mice. I don't know. It's kind of weird. Living by their slogan of deeds, not words, the Women's Social and Political Union, WSPU, turned more and more militant. Emmeline, Christabel, her daughter, and other WSPU leaders organized the War for the Vote. They vandalized golf courses, railroad cars, and government offices. They set buildings on fire and planted bombs in mailboxes. In June 1913, about 5 months before her freedom or death speech, Emily Davidson, a WSPU member, made a statement by throwing herself in front of the King's horses during a derby at Epsom, just outside of London. She died days later. With the warrant out for her arrest, Emmeline conveniently made a fundraising trip to America. She was invited by Katharine Houghton Hepburn, the head of Connecticut's Women's Suffrage Association, to speak in Hartford, Connecticut. Emmeline never mentioned Emily Davidson in her speech, but it was the emotional drumbeat in the background. Emmeline accepted Davidson's act as a conscious and deliberate martyrdom and defied those who doubted her sanity. Judging by the length of the original speech, she probably spoke for well over 2 hours. We obviously had to strip the speech down. And now, straight out of the history books, Hartford, Connecticut, November 13, 1913, the shorter version of Freedom or Death, originally delivered by Emmeline Pankhurst. Many people come to Hartford to address meetings as advocates of some reform. Tonight, it is not to advocate a reform that I address a meeting in Hartford. I do not come here as an advocate because whatever position the suffrage movement may occupy in the United States of America. In England, it has passed beyond the realm of advocacy, and it has entered into the sphere of practical politics. It has become the subject of revolution and civil war. And so tonight, I am not here to advocate women's suffrage. American suffragists can do that very well for themselves. I am here as a soldier who has temporarily left the field of battle in order to explain, it seems strange, it should have to be explained, what civil war is like when civil war is waged by women. I'm not only here as a soldier, temporarily absent from the field of battle, I am here, and that I think is the strangest part of my coming, I am here as a person who, according to the law courts of my country, it has been decided, is of no value to the community at all. I am adjudged because of my life to be a dangerous person, under sentence of penal servitude in a convict prison. So you see, there is some special interest in hearing so unusual person address you. I dare say, in the minds of many of you, you will perhaps forgive me this personal touch. that I do not look either like a soldier or very like a convict, and yet I am both. Now, first of all, I want to make you understand the inevitableness of revolution and civil war. Even on the part of women, when you reach a certain stage in the development of a community's life, it is not at all difficult if revolutionaries come to you from Russia, if they come to you from China or from any other part of the world, if they are men. To make you understand revolution in 5 minutes, every man and every woman to understand revolutionary methods when they are adopted by men. You see, in spite of a good deal that we hear about revolutionary methods not being necessary for American women because American women are so well off, most of the men in the United States quite calmly acquiesce in the fact that half of the community are deprived absolutely of citizen rights. And we women, in trying to make our case clear, always have to make as part of our argument and urge upon men in our audience the fact, a very simple fact, that women are human beings. And it is quite evident you do not realize we are human beings, or it would not be necessary to argue with you that women may, suffering from intolerable injustice, be driven to adopt revolutionary methods. We have, first of all, to convince you we are human beings, and I hope to be able to do that in the course of the evening before I sit down. But before doing that, I want to put a few political arguments before you. Not arguments for the suffrage, because I said when I opened I didn't mean to do that, but arguments for the adoption of militant methods in order to win political rights. A great many of you have been led to believe, from somewhat meager accounts you get in the newspaper, that in England there's a strange manifestation taking place, a new form of hysteria being swept across part of the feminist population of those isles. And this manifestation takes the shape of irresponsible breaking of windows, burning of letters, general inconveniences to respectable, honest business people who want to attend to their business. It is very irrational, you say, even if these women had sufficient intelligence to understand what they were doing and really did want the vote, they have adopted very irrational means for getting the vote. How are they going to persuade people that they ought to have the vote by breaking their windows? You say. Now, if you say that, it shows you do not understand the meaning of a revolution at all. And I want to show you that when damage is done to property, it is done in order to convert people to women's. It is not done in order to convert people to women's suffrage at all. It is a practical political means, the only means we consider open to voteless persons to bring about a political situation, which can only be solved by giving women the vote. It is perfectly evident to any logical mind that when you have got the vote, by the proper use of the vote in sufficient numbers, by combinations, you can get out of any legislation whatever you want. Or, if you cannot get it, you can send them about their business and choose other people who will be more attentive to your demands. But it is clear to the meanest intelligence that if you have not gotten the vote, you must either submit to laws just or unjust, administration just or unjust, or the time inevitably comes when you will revolt against that injustice and use violent means to put an end to it. That is so logically correct that we hear politicians today talk about the inherent right of revolution and rebellion on the part of human beings suffering from an intolerable injustice. And in England today, we are having a situation brought about by men which exactly illustrates the case. We have got in Ireland today a very serious situation. I refer to the fact that for generations, Irish agitators, Irish lawbreakers, Irish criminals who have been sentenced to long terms of imprisonment in English convict prisons have come over to America and have asked the people of the United States to give them money to send them help in various forms to fight the Irish Rebellion. The Irish Rebellion has, at last, during the past few years, come into practical politics. And it has found shape in a measure which has now passed through the House of Commons and through the House of Lords, giving what the Irishmen so long wanted: home rule to Ireland. That is to say, next June, a parliament is going to be set up in Dublin, an Irish parliament, for the management of Irish affairs quite distinct from the government in London. The majority of men in Ireland desired it. Presumably, the majority of women acquiesced in their desire. But they were not asked whether they wished it or not. It is certain that in the course of the Irish Rebellion, women have taken a very prominent part, and it is rather a noble point to which I should call to your attention. That when the imprisonment of Irish men took place in the course of their political rebellion, they were put almost invariably, after a certain amount of time or a certain amount of struggle in the First Division, and were treated as political offenders. But when women, helping the men, got into the coils of the law, all those women in Ireland who were helping the men to get home rule were invariably treated as ordinary criminals and got ordinary criminal treatments. You see, ladies, even in a rebellion, there is an advantage to being a voter. If you are not a voter, you are liable to get very much worse treatment than the voters, even the law-breaking voters, get. Now, the situation today then is that home rule for Ireland is to take effect early next year or in the course of next year. But there is a part of Ireland which does not want home rule. There is a part of Ireland which prefers to be governed by London. That is the north of Ireland, the county of Ulster. For racial reasons, for religious reasons, for economic reasons, the majority of people there do not want home rule at all. They call themselves loyalist, unionist, and they want to maintain the union with Great Britain in its present form. Directly the Home Rule Bill passed, directly it was perfectly clear that home rule was to be granted. And these people began to revolt. They had a leader, a man who formed a part of the last Conservative administration, Sir Edward Carson. A distinguished lawyer, a distinguished statesman. He is an Irishman. Sir Edward Carson came to be the leader of the Ulster Rebellion. He has advocated civil war, and he has not only advocated civil war, he has urged the men of Ulster to drill and prepare to fight if civil war comes to pass. The first stage in this rebellion was the signing of a great declaration on behalf of the Union. It is rather noble that not only men signed the declaration, but women signed it also. The women of Ulster were invited to sign the declaration along with the men. And to those people who say that the province of women is quite apart from politics, that women by nature take no interest in politics, I would like to say that more women signed that declaration than did men. Considerably more. Well, the last stage of this struggle, and the struggle is coming to a head, is this: that Sir Edward Carson has been making speeches in which he has gloried in having broken the law. He has challenged the British government to arrest him. Arms have been shipped to Ireland, and there is not a club, a young man's club, a working man's club, or the middle class or the upper man's club, that were not drilling and preparing for civil war. The law has already been broken, because there has been considerable riots in the streets of Belfast, and lives have even been lost. And I want to say to you in this meeting, how much have you heard at all of this in the American newspaper? Have you heard loud condemnation from English newspapers echoed in your own papers? No. No. The newspapers and you have accepted quite calmly the fact that revolution is preparing in Ireland, and not one of you Whether you are a newspaper editor writing leading articles in your sanctum, or whether you are a businessman or a professional man, not one of you has questioned the right of those men in Ulster, although they are voters and have a constitutional means for getting redress for their grievances. The right of those men to resort to revolution if everything else fails. Well, there is another picture, another contrast I want to draw. We have Sir Edward Carson preaching revolution and justifying bloodshed in defense of what he calls the rights of the manhood of Ulster, the right of having themselves governed in a way they prefer. He has not hesitated to advocate the shedding of blood because he says it is quite worthwhile to shed blood of your own and other people's, in defense of your citizen rights, in defense of your having the right to choose the form of government you wish. Sir Edward Carson has not been arrested. Sir Edward Carson has not been charged with conspiracy. Sir Edward Carson has not been sent to jail. He has been making precisely the same kind of speeches that I made up to the month of March last, which with this difference, that while he has justified the shedding of human blood in a revolution, I have always said that nothing would bring me to the point of claiming that we should destroy human life in the course of our women's agitation. That is the only distinction between his speeches and mine, that he has advocated and justified the taking of life, where I have always stopped short in my justifications at property, at inanimate objects. I have always said human life is sacred, and in a women's revolution we respect human life, and we stop short of injury to human life. Now, it would take too long to trace the course of militant methods as adopted by women, because it is about 8 years since the word militant was first used to describe what we were doing. It is about 8 years since the first militant action was taken by women. It was not militant at all, except that it provoked militancy on the part of those who were opposed to it. When women asked questions in political meetings and failed to get answers, they are not doing anything militant. To ask questions at political meetings is an acknowledged right of all people who attend public meetings. Certainly, in my country, men have always done it, and I hope they do it in America, because it seems to me that if you allow people to enter your legislation without asking them any questions as to what they are going to do when they get there, you are not exercising your citizen rights and your citizen duties as you ought. At any rate, in Great Britain, it is a custom, a time-honored one, to ask questions of candidates of Parliament and ask questions of members of the government. No man was ever put out of public meeting for asking a question until votes for women came onto the political horizon. The first people who were put out of a political meeting for asking questions were women. They were brutally ill-used. They found themselves in jail before 24 hours had expired. But instead of the newspapers, which are largely inspired by the politicians, putting militancy and the reproach of militancy, if reproach there is, on the people who had assaulted the women, they actually said that it was the women who were militant and very much to blame. How different the reasoning is that men adopt when they are discussing the cases of men as those of women. Had they been men who asked the questions, and had those men been brutally ill-used, you would have heard a chorus of reprobation on the part of the people toward those who refused to answer those questions. But as they were women who asked the questions, it was not the speakers on the platform who would not answer them who were to blame, or the ushers at the meeting. It was the poor women who had had their bruises and their knocks and scratches, who were put into prison for doing precisely nothing but holding a protest meeting in the street after it was all over. However, we were called militant. We were quite willing to accept the name. because militancy for us is time-honored. And you have the church militant, and in the sense of spiritual militancy, we were very militant indeed. We were determined to press this question of the enfranchisement of women to the point where we would no longer be ignored by the politicians, as had been the case for about 50 years, during which time women had patiently used every means open to them with their political enfranchisement. Experience will show you that if you really want to get anything done, it is not so much a matter of whether you alienate sympathy. Sympathy is a very unsatisfactory thing if it is not practical sympathy. It does not matter to the practical suffragist whether she alienates sympathy that was never of any use to her. What she wants is to get something practical done. And whether it is done out of sympathy or whether it is done out of fear or whether it is done because you want to be comfortable again and not be worried in this way doesn't particularly matter so long as you get it. We had enough of sympathy for 50 years. It has never brought us anything, and we would rather have an angry man going to the government and saying, "My business is interfered with, and I won't submit it to being interfered with because you will no longer give women the vote," than to have a gentleman come onto our platform year in and year out and talk about his ardent sympathy with women's suffrage. In our Civil War, people have suffered, but you cannot make omelets without breaking eggs. You cannot have Civil War without damage to something. The great thing is to see that no more damage is done than is absolutely necessary. That you do just as much as will arouse enough feeling to bring about peace, to bring about an honorable peace for the combatants, as that is what we have been doing. Within the last few days, you have read, I don't know how accurate the news cables are in America. I always take them with a grain of salt. But you have read within the last few days that some more empty houses have been burned, that a cactus house have been destroyed, and some valuable plants have suffered in that house. That some pavilion at a pleasure ground has also been burned. Well, it is quite possible that it has happened. I knew before I came here that for one whole day, telegraphic and telephonic communication between Glasgow and London was entirely suspended. We do more in England, in our Civil War, without the sacrifice of a single life, than they did in the War of the Balkan States when they had the siege of Adrianople. Because during the whole of that siege, in the course of what thousands of people were killed and those houses were shelled and destroyed, telegraphic communications was continuous the whole time. If there had been a stockbroker in Adrianople who wanted to communicate with a customer in London, he could have done it. There might have been a little delay, but he would have been able to do it. But we, without the loss of a single life in our war, in this effort to rouse businessmen to compel the government to give us the vote, because they are the people who can do it in the last resort, we entirely prevented a stockbroker in London from telegraphing to stockbrokers in Glasgow and vice versa. For one whole day, telegraphic and telephonic communications was entirely stopped. I'm not going to tell you how it was done. I'm not going to tell you how the women got to the mains and cut the wires, but it was done. And it was done, and it was proved to the authorities that weak women, suffrage women, as we are supposed to be, had enough ingenuity to create a situation of that kind. Now I ask you, if women can do that, is there any limit to what we can do except the limit we put upon ourselves? Put them in prison, they said. That will stop it. But it didn't stop it. They put women in prison for long terms of imprisonment, for making a nuisance of themselves. That was an expression when they took petitions in their hands to the door of the House of Commons. And they thought by sending them to prison, giving them a day's imprisonment, would cause them to all settle down again and there would be no further trouble. But it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Instead, women giving it up, more women did it. And more women did it until there were 300 women at a time who had not broken a single law, only made a nuisance of themselves, as the politicians say. Well, then, they thought they must go a little farther, and so they began imposing punishments of a very serious kind. The judge who sentenced me last May to 3 years penal servitude for certain speeches, which I had accepted responsibility for acts of violence done by other women, said that if I could say I was sorry, if I could promise not to do it again, that he would revise the sentence and shorten it, because he admitted that it was a very heavy sentence, especially as the jury recommended me to mercy because of the purity of my motives. And he said he was giving me a determinate sentence, a sentence that would convince me that I would give up my evil ways and could also deter other women from imitating me. But it hadn't that effect at all. So far from it having that effect, more and more women have been doing these things, and I had incited them to do, and were more determined in doing them, so that the long, determinate sentence had no effect in crushing the agitation. Well, then, they must do something else, and they began to legislate. I want to tell men in this meeting that the British government, which is not remarkable for having very mild laws to administer, has passed more stringent laws to deal with this agitation than it had ever found necessary during all the history of political agitation in my country. They were able to deal with revolutionaries of the Chartist times. They were able to deal with the trade unions' agitation. They were able to deal with revolutionaries later on when the Reform Act of 1867 and 1884 were passed. But the ordinary law has not sufficed to curb insurgent women. They have had to pass special legislation, and now they are on the point of admitting that that special legislation has absolutely failed. They had to dip back into the Middle Ages to find a means of repressing the women in revolt. And the whole history shows how futile it is for men who have been considerable able statesmen to deal with dissatisfied women who are determined to win their citizenship and who will not submit to government until their consent is obtained. That is the whole point of our agitation. The whole argument with anti-suffragists or even the critical suffragist man is this, that you can govern human beings without their consent. They have said to us, government rests upon force, that women haven't had force, women don't have force, so they must submit. Well, we are showing them that government does not rest upon force at all. It rests upon consent. As long as women consent to be unjustly governed, they can be. But directly women say, we withhold our consent. We will not be governed any longer so long as that government is unjust. Not by the forces of civil war can you govern the very weakest women. You can kill that woman, but she escapes you then. You cannot govern her, and that is, I think, a most valuable demonstration we have been making to the world. Now, I want to say to you who think women cannot succeed, we have brought the government of England to this position, that it has to face this alternative. Either women are to be killed, or women are to have the vote. I ask men in this meeting, what would you say if your state were faced with that alternative? That you must either kill them or give them their citizenship. Women, many of whom you respect, women whom you know have lived useful lives. Women whom you know, even if you do not know them personally, are animated with the highest motives. Women who are in the pursuit of liberty and the power to do useful public service. Well, there's only one answer to that alternative. There's only one way out of it. Unless you are prepared to put back civilization 2 or 3 generations, you must give those women the vote. Now that is the outcome. That is the outcome of our Civil War. You won your freedom in America when you had the revolution by bloodshed, by sacrificing human life. You won the Civil War by the sacrifice of human life when you decided to emancipate the Negro. You have left it to women in your land. The men of all civilized countries have left it to women to work out their own salvation. That is the way in which we women of England are doing. Human life for us is sacred. But we say if any life is to be sacrificed, it shall be ours. We won't do it ourselves, but we will put the enemy in the position where they will have to choose between giving us freedom or giving us death. During World War I, the WSPU stopped campaigning. In the UK, women 30 secured the right to vote in 1918, and in 1928, women gained the same voting rights as men, with everyone over 21 able to vote. Emmeline lived in Canada from 1919 to 1926. Worried about Bolshevism, she returned to England and ran for Parliament for the Conservative Party. She died on January 14, 1928, only weeks before the Conservative government extended voting rights to all women over 21 on July 2nd, 1928. Thank you for joining us during this historical moment. See you next time, where the dead teach.